Hey guys, here we are for Chapter 10, which is going to be Sustaining Biodiversity, Saving the Ecosystem Services. Today, specifically, we're going to look at forest. Right off the bat, we have our case study, and this is Costa Rica. Costa Rica is in Central America, bordered on ocean by both sides. It once was completely covered in tropical forest. But between like 1963 and 83, there was massive deforestation. Mainly a handful of politically connected families cut down a lot of the forest for lumber and then grazing cattle on it. But it still harbors great biodiversity because it is this rainforest area. It has mountains, coast. It is teeming with life and has lots of different microclimates, so we find just a multitude of biodiversity there. More than 27% of its land and its nature reserves are national parks. So almost 30% has been put aside to be national parks. And at this point, the government is actually paying landowners to restore forests. And the forests now cover 50% of Costa Rica, up from 20% just in 1983. So this is a great example of success at work. When people come together, get involved, and realize what is important, we really can make a big difference. We'll see something similar that's actually happened in the United States since the 1920s. Today, 10.1 specifically are going to be threats to the forest ecosystem. Forest ecosystems provide ecosystem services that are far greater in value than actually the value of the wood and the other raw materials. In other words, if we go out there and cut down the forest, well, the things they provide for us beyond just the wood, we would have to replace in some shape, form, or fashion. We'd either have to manufacture something to take care of it, make up for the loss in soil, etc. So it provides a service. Once again, oxygen, purification of water, harboring food, recreation, all this is a value to you and me and everybody, which actually far outweighs just the price of lumber or paper that we get from it. Now, some of the chief threats to our forest ecosystems are going to be unsustainable cutting and burning of the forest, where we do it in a rate faster than it can replenish itself, and then climate change. So let's dig in and look at some of these things a little more detail. First off, what do forests do? Well, they remove CO2 from the atmosphere. They're plants, right? That's what they do. They're taking CO2 out of the air and they're putting oxygen in. But when they take that CO2 out of the air, they're storing it in the leaves and the trees. So they wind up being a repository of carbon. They're pulling it out of the atmosphere and then it's remaining in the trees. This also helps to stabilize atmospheric temperatures. It's cooler in the woods than it is out in the city. So it helps to be a temperature stabilizer. They store water. Soaking up water from the ground, they're storing it in the plants themselves. Once again, an important repository of water that then also gets released from the trees. The forests provide habitats for up to 2/3 of the world's terrestrial species. Once again, 2/3 of all terrestrial species exist in the forest systems. That's where they live. And then they provide things like biofuel, where we can burn it to get power. Industrial wood, this is lumber for our houses, making desks, paper. And a lot of traditional medicines come from plants and some animals that we find in the forest. These are just a handful of some of the things that they actually provide. So along with helping provide all these things and also like medicines, they really vary in their age and their structure. Forests all over the world are a lot of various different types of forests. So we talk about old growth forests or primary forests. So an old growth forest, this is something that has been untouched for like 2,000 years. We haven't cut it down for lumber, or it hasn't been destroyed by a hurricane, massive forest fire, something of this nature. There's a lot of places we haven't gone to cut, but they still may have been disturbed by a natural disaster. So anything over 200 years old that's remained untouched by any kind of disaster, human or man-made, old growth. Second growth forest. We have a lot of this in the United States. We went through and we did cut it down, but now we've left it alone. So second growth, the trees have come back by secondary ecological succession, either from a forest fire that may have ravaged the area, or we went in, we logged, and then we let it sit, and the forest has come back. So that's second growth forest. And then also there's tree plantations, a tree farm, a commercial forest, if you will. This is where somebody has specifically planted trees with the purpose of harvesting them later. Now these trees all tend to be the same age, they planted them all at the same time, and then we go back and we clear cut them and replant again. So a tree farm is the area where we grow trees, but it cycles through their growth structures. But these are our three main types that we'll talk about. We talk about age and structure. We're not referring to deciduous versus taiga versus tropical, just a forest, age and structure. Their natural ecosystem services. Scientists went out in the field and they looked at the things that they did and they tried to put a price tag on it. Because people say, why should we care? Well, the economical services they provide come up to be about $125 trillion a year. Now this is all of the ecosystem services combined. The forests themselves, just the forest, account for like $15 trillion per year in ecosystem services. This is like the gross national product of the US, just that the forests provide. What do? Well, it's waste treatment. They pull pollutants out of the air, including CO2. Recreation, we like to go there. Well, it's a free place, right? We go out into the nature. No, other times we have to go pay for it. So it provides recreation, so we can put a price tag on that. Erosion control. If the forest wasn't there, then the soil runs away down into the river and into the sea, and we've lost it, and we have to do things to try and prevent it. That costs money. Food production. The food that we get out of forest in the way of plants and animals, and the nutrient cycling, simply getting the cycling back into the soil. If we're having to put the fertilizer ourselves down to make it nutrient rich, then there's a price tag. So there's a lot of things that they do, and it comes to a whopping $125 trillion a year that these services are providing for us, in a sense, for free. If we got rid of them, we would have to do something to make sure these systems continue. We have to have oxygen to breathe, we have to have water to drink. Since 1977, the world has been losing ecosystem services valued at about $20 trillion a year. As we cut these things down, they're not there, so we don't get the services back out of them. This is why we need to go to what we talk about many times as full cost pricing. When I go to buy lumber, I need to buy the full price of it, not just what it costs to cut the tree down and to get it turned into a 2x4, but some sort of pricing for what it costs overall. Because once that forest is gone, if we don't do something about it, we have to go back and add some services in. There's an ongoing source of ecological income if it's used sustainably. If we take the trees out of a forest in such a way we don't destroy the forest, then we get an ongoing source of income. And this is why this full cost pricing really comes into play and can help. So the picture up here we can look at is kind of how it cycles through in like a tree farm or something that's done sustainable. We plant the trees, they grow, we weed a few of them out as they're not strong or healthy, and they grow up, then we harvest them, and the cycle goes round and around. But this keeps an area sustainable. When it comes to harvesting trees, there's some steps that tend to occur. First off, we tend to build in a logging road, or we put in a highway of any kind. Typically we put in a road. Now all of a sudden we have easy access to the forest. Now if we're logging, we're specifically trying to take the trees out, and the logging road quite often will get then turned into something else. Once we've cleared trees, then we may well turn it into pasture, put houses, something else. But a logging road goes in or a highway goes in, and then we begin to cut the area around it. If we're just logging, there are several different things we can do. We can do selective cutting. This is a lot what we're trying to do more of in the United States. This is where we go into a forest and we mark them. We're going to take this tree, this tree, this tree, this tree. So we mark an area and we take out, a third of the trees in this area. We leave the old growth trees, we take out medium, mature, and we'll leave the young trees. So we take the mature ones out, leave the old growth. So we take them out, it clears it out a little bit, but this gives space for the younger trees to grow up. But it's more expensive because we can't just cut everything down. We're having to get some of the trees out. It's more sustainable, but it does cost more, going into full cost pricing. Then we have clear cutting. Now, if you are a logger or you are a sawmill owner and you're just after the lumber, this is the cheapest way to do it. You put it in the road and we just start cutting down the trees. You cut down everything. You clear cut the entire forest and you remove the trees and take them off and you're left with nothing there. And picture shows here what it looks like when we clear cut. It's just all gone. That little patch of trees, they just haven't got to it yet. And we have strip cutting. Now the picture up here is trying to show the three different types, if you will, when we look at it. So at the very top, that was the selective cutting. We go in, we select it out. The middle one is showing clear cutting. We just cut everything down. The other one is strip cutting. What we do is we go in and we remove this little section of the forest. We come back years later and we remove a different section of the forest. So this helps for erosion. A lot of things it's a little cheaper because we can come in and take out all the trees right here, but it still helps preserve the forest. It's not as good as the selective cutting typically, but these are some of the strategies that we have. Now, other threats to forest: fires, insect, and disease. So just going in and cutting down forest is a huge threat, but it's not the only one that we have. Now, fires. We have surface fires and crown fires. So let's look at a surface fire. This is just a wildfire. It's burning mainly through the underbrush. It's just going to burn the leaf litter and the undergrowth, things right on the top. Now it'll burn out some of the little small trees or little seedlings or little bushes, but the trees with nice bark on them remain intact. And this actually provides several ecological services. It does get rid of this leaf litter, so it keeps a bigger forest fire from happening. If we have smaller fires come through every year or so, it keeps the whole forest from burning down. And in some places with seeds like sequoias, they need the heat to soften them up so they can actually sprout. So some plants need a forest fire. The seeds won't germinate unless they've been exposed to this kind of heat. So it actually does a lot for a forest, these surface fires. The other are crown fires. Now, crown fires are very dangerous. These are extremely hot. They burn the whole tree. They literally jump from treetop to treetop and consume a whole forest. When we see the wildfires that have been happening in California, this is what we're looking at, crown fires. These are very dangerous. They burn down the entire forest. They'll kill wildlife because a lot of times wildlife can't escape or get out, or if they don't, there's no forest left to go back to. And this increases topsoil erosion because there's nothing left. If it's just a surface fire, the trees are still there. We don't get as much erosion and the little grasses and shrubs come back pretty quickly. And then climate change. Climate change is lengthening the fire seasons. Spring is coming sooner, summer's staying longer, and the areas are getting drier. Just a degree temperature increase on average causes the fire season to last a lot longer. We're not getting as much rain in the areas, it's drier, and the forest fires burn hotter and worse. And we're seeing a lot of that, especially in America, in California. So those surface fires tend to be good for the environment overall. Crown fires, these are not. These are what literally destroy forests. And usually in our wildlife services, they're actually doing controlled burns in forests a lot of the times to make sure we don't have the major forest fires. Once again, the occasional forest fire are taken care of. They're burning out the dry litter, keeping us from having the crown fires, and they also control a lot of the destructive insects and tree diseases. because as these diseases or insects come in, these little fires burn it out, kill them, the larvae can't hatch, and it keeps these populations down. So they are really quite needed. The picture up here is areas in the west of America where the forests are being damaged by pine bark beetles. Pine bark beetles have been around, but normally they've been under better check or control. These are affecting pine bark, conifer forest, pine forest. The warmer climate is allowing the beetle to spread to higher elevations. The cold used to keep it in check. Well, it's staying warmer, and it's warmer higher up, and they're spreading into other areas where they didn't used to be. So like an invasive species, but it's happening because of climate change. And the lack of the cold temperature keeps them from getting killed off. Here in Florida, we know we want to have some days that gets down to freezing or below to help cull our insect population. If it gets cold enough, the fleas and like mosquitoes die off, and we don't have as many when it comes spring. Same way with these pine beetles. If it doesn't get cold enough, it doesn't kill them off, and then we have greater populations of them. But all throughout the western United States, pine beetles are causing a really big problem. Now with our old growth forest, we have old growth, secondary growth, and then just commercial tree lots, if you will. We're getting a lot of deforestation in these old growth forests, and it's the temporary or permanent removal of these large expanses, mainly for agriculture, farming some way. They'll take the wood and will use the wood, but they're mainly clearing it out for economic purposes. They're just looking at, I need to turn a buck. So they're turning it into grazing land or agricultural lands. And a lot of our tropical forests, especially in Latin America, Indonesia, and Africa, are really getting cut down at an alarming rate so that they can use it mainly for agricultural purposes. Growing food of some kind, whether that's plants or animals. Usually in the rainforest, the soil is bad and it very quickly has to just turn into grazing lands. So tropical forest, but also the boreal forest, the boreal or taiga. Now this is happening in Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia. It has to be the northern or the cold climates, mainly up in the northern hemisphere, where we have these boreal forests. But they're being cut down again at an alarming rate, mainly for wood. It's there, they're large forests, and we're going into them for logging purposes. And a lot up in Alaska, some are being cleared out for drilling for oil. Now some countries have actually increased their forest cover. We looked at Costa Rica in the case study. Well, the United States is actually another one that has. Now in the US, a lot wind up being tree plantations, or at least a lot of these areas where we're seeing increased forest cover is from tree plantations. But this is good. That way we keep going to this one area to take it out for our lumber, and it leaves the other forest intact for all of the other services, including habitat for many animals. China has actually begun paying individuals to stop logging forests and to reforest log land. So if there is a logged land, China will pay people to go in and actually reforest it. This has cut their deforestation down in half, and it has really seriously decreased flooding in the areas as well where we see that. Because when we lose these old growth forests, that natural capital, that thing we all need to be able to pull from, gets cut down. So the degradation comes down to water pollution and soil degradation. We cut down the forest and we wind up having greater water pollution because the trees are helping to purify things. They're pulling pollutants out of the air and out of the ground. We get a lot more soil erosion. Without plant life there, the soil washes away. And it can take hundreds or even thousands of years to make an inch of topsoil by a natural production, depending on how warm it is and all this stuff. Without the forest, we have a lot more flooding. It rains. There's nothing to slow the water process reaching into the towns and cities. local extinction of a lot of different species. Many things require forests to live in as a habitat. And then it's just habitat loss for even migrating species. Maybe they don't live there permanently, but they're there part of the year. And not to mention, it's releasing CO2. The trees are taking CO2 out of the air, and they're storing CO2 in them. And when we cut them down, they're not taking CO2 out, and actually it's releasing a lot of CO2 in the trees. So it can be a double whammy. Now in the United States, we've really seen a success story. I'll put the pictures up. Between like 1620 and 1920, that's the top picture. What forests look like in the United States. This is pretty much just naturally how they were. Yes, we've had people in the area of the United States prior to the 1600s, but the forests were left more intact, and that's what it looked like. By the 1920s, that middle picture, that's what the United States looked like. We had logged most of the eastern portion of the United States. This is where people moved in. This was most of our population, and we saw these trees as an endless resource, and we were cutting them down like mad. Since the 1920s, we've allowed a lot of our forests to come back. Now, most of this is obviously secondary growth. We had logged it, cut stuff down, and now we've left it alone. We've put some as national forests, national parks. We've encouraged growth of woods in a lot of places. So large areas of the old growth and secondary growth have been replaced with some tree farms or these tree plantations. A growing threat we have now is in the South. More specifically, we're cutting down a lot of our hardwood forests to make wood pellets for export to Europe. They have these bio plants where they can actually burn wood to create electricity, but it requires these hardwood pellets, and we're cutting down some of our forests to sell them out of profit. So this is something we really need to watch and kind of put a check on. Now, tropical forest. We talked about boreal, we talked about US tropical forest. The majority of loss of our tropical forests has been since 1950. We're only talking 70 years. Primarily Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. This is where we have our largest tropical forests. Although it's not shocking, that's where we're losing them from. And as we clear these trees, it accelerates climate change for all the reasons we talked about. They help to regulate temperature. More CO2 in the air means more greenhouse gases in the air, and too much of a good thing, can be a bad thing. And unfortunately, Indonesia is actually leading the world in their tropical deforestation at this point in time, and primarily for palm oil. They're cutting the forest down so they can just plant in the palm trees so they can harvest the palm oil for sale, because there's such a demand for palm oil at this point in time. A lot of causes for it. Population growth. Once again, dig into HIPCO and you can identify why these things are happening. Population growth, we have poverty, so there's a lot of just subsistence farmer. I've got to try and make a way to get by. Ranching, once again, we cut down the tropical forest and then we're just putting cattle out on it. Lumber, pulling it out for lumber. The plantation farms like palm oil for just global trade, because there is a worldwide desire for these things and people will rise up and provide the need. So consume as little palm oil as possible and we can cut down the global need for it. At the end of August 2019, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil had more than 80,000 reported fires. This is a 77% increase from the previous year's dry season. Now, we believe it's a combination of things. Some of it is slash and burn technique, because we want to get to the agricultural land. Now, they take out the wood they can, and the scrub and stuff they light on fire and burn out. The temperatures have been above average, and we've had unusually long dry seasons. So some of these fires are natural fires. Some start as just the scrub wildfire. They can turn into crown. Some are being specifically done. But the question is, what should we do? The current president of Brazil doesn't believe in climate change. He thinks it's just a hoax to try and keep them from being able to develop their land and benefit financially from the Amazon. We're saying you should protect the Amazon. He's saying we need it as a resource. But the question is, what should Brazil and what should other Amazon countries do? What should they take? What should they leave? How does it impact all of us? How does it impact them? These are difficult questions, but they're the questions we need to ask. That is it for today. Wrapping it up for section 1. We will join you again tomorrow or whenever you get to it for section 2, and we'll look at how we need to manage and sustain our forest. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time.